Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us for our June Lunch and Learn. I'm Jessie McClellan, Executive Director of the Georgia Arborist Association. Thank you so much for joining us on your lunch break today to learn about remote sensing in utility arboriculture. Just a couple of announcements before we go ahead and get started. I hope you'll all join us for next month's webinar, which is going to be in our evening format. That topic is going to be trees and stormwater runoff management. That is scheduled for July 15th at 6:15 p.m. So I hope you'll join us for that monthly webinar. We also have another webinar, the conclusion of our business in arboriculture series. That topic is going to be safety from scratch, building a safety program. That webinar is free for anyone to attend, and it is next week, June 26th at 1 p.m. That will conclude our Business of Arboriculture series, and all of those videos will be available on YouTube if you missed the first six. A couple of other programs that we have coming up, if you're interested in the wildfire risk reduction qualification, that's going to be in July as well, July 16th and 17th at the GFC headquarters near Macon. We're also offering the tree and plant appraisal qualification course put on by ASCA. So that should be great. That's also at the end of July. And then our summer workshop, our big summer program, is going to be on preparing for the upcoming storm season. We have a whole host of different topics and speakers, from rigging to lightning protection installation. So check that out if you haven't already. I'd love to see you there for that as well. We do have an upcoming virtual exam prep course as well that will be in September. So make sure you check out the upcoming events on our webpage. Most of you who have attended our past webinars are familiar with Jessie Pollard, who is a frequent guest of ours. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing my screen so that we can welcome Jessie. Jessie is a board member for GAA as well as the Georgia Tree Council and works with Georgia Power. I'll let her introduce herself further. One quick note, we do offer a CEU for this, and the form to fill out to get the CEU will be posted in the chat at the end. And then also, if you have questions, we're going to save them to the end, but feel free to drop them in the Q&A as they come up. And then at the end of the presentation, we'll have time to ask Jessie more questions. So without further ado, welcome, Jessie. Thank you so much for taking time out of your day to present for us.
Awesome. Thanks so much for that intro, Jessie. Yeah, so today I'm going to be speaking on remote sensing and utility arboriculture. So I have given some previous webinars regarding utility arboriculture. So want to just touch on this topic. I do want to preface this presentation by saying I'm not a data analyst and I'm not an expert in any of these topics, but I do think it's important to share how these can benefit the utility industry and how we create our work plans and how we can successfully continue to use new and emerging technologies. I'm actually going to turn off my video just to make sure that the quality of the presentation stays throughout, and then I'll turn it back on at the end to answer any questions that might pop up. As Jessie said, I work for Georgia Power currently as a utility arborist supervisor, and we have implemented some of these remote sensing technologies, so have a little bit of experience with them and how they can help when creating a work plan and managing field conditions as it relates to utility vegetation management. So I do want to start out, obviously, just a little background on utility arboriculture. I would think a lot of people on this call, if you're joining, may already have some knowledge of this, but utility arboriculture is a specialized field focused on the management of trees and vegetation near power lines and other utility infrastructure. What we're talking about today is power lines, but you've also got internet cables and phone cables and other types of utilities, gas line rights of way that do vegetation management in order to keep the integrity of those rights of way intact. Today, we're going to be focusing on power lines. Why is it important for utilities to maintain vegetation around the power lines? There's two main buckets that I always consider when talking about this. So you've got safety and reliability. So obviously, I'm sure a lot of people saw this video. This is a kind of a clip from a video that went around on social media a few years ago. But when a tree comes into contact with a power line, that tree becomes energized. So wood is an excellent conductor of electricity. As soon as that tree contacts the power line or even gets within feet of the power line, it can become a conductor of that electricity. And the power doesn't always get knocked out immediately. That tree can stand there energized and pose a significant safety hazard for anyone around it, anyone coming into contact. And then obviously you've got a fire hazard. From this video, the tree in the video caught on fire, it remained energized. So not only do you have that risk of electric shock or electrocution, but you've also got a fire hazard introduced, which can be detrimental for the area, as we've seen from past experiences. And then you've got the reliability portion. As a electric utility, we are obligated to provide a service to the public, to those customers that we have. Our main goal is doing our best to make sure that the electricity that our customers receive is reliable and that we are doing everything that we can to prevent and respond to outages that occur on the system, and for us, specifically related to vegetation. So, when we're talking about how this work is planned, obviously we've started at a point and we're moving towards using technology to help us plan this work and to mitigate those vegetation conflicts with the power lines. How are utilities identifying hazards on their rights of way, and how has it been done historically? So, those of you on the call who have worked in the industry, at one time we're using paper maps. So, the utility may be printing out a huge copy of a map of a circuit power line and giving it over to tree crew contractor and saying, hey, go trim this whole circuit. And you're writing the line using highlighters and pens to make notes on this giant paper map that you're unfolding in the cab of your truck. And that was in its infancy how we were planning work and how we were getting the work done in the field. We've also seen utilities use a pre-planning approach, going out, having an arborist go ahead of the crews that do the work and actually planning work for them. So identifying threats, whether that's trees growing into or towards the line in the right of way, dead, dangerous, declining trees, and identifying those ahead of time, identifying them for the crews, and then assigning the work to them that way. And from a baseline, I'd say the most popular sort of work management is a cycle-based schedule. So we're doing this work, we're looking at these power line circuits on a schedule basis. You could just use the example of a line is getting looked at every 2 to 4 years, depending on what part of the world you're in. And in between those cycles, you lose a little bit of awareness of the condition of that circuit. And all of those things together, I think, gets you thinking, how can we do this more efficiently? How can we continue to leverage new technologies out there to give us more awareness of the conditions of our systems? And then how can we use all of that to, in the end, produce a better product for our customers in terms of their electric reliability? That's a starting point, I think. And obviously, my experiences with Georgia Power, but I would say that most utilities are probably starting in similar areas and working towards leveraging that technology to help the human eye when planning this work. So, what is remote sensing? Remote sensing is the process of detecting and monitoring the physical characteristics of an area by measuring its reflected and emitted radiation at a distance, typically from satellite or aircraft. Essentially, you're utilizing technology to give you a snapshot of what's going on in a specific area. And what we're going to talk about today specifically is the use of LiDAR and the use of satellite imagery, and how those two things, how they're different, how they compare to each other, and what are their uses when it comes to utility vegetation management. So how is remote sensing used on distribution? So I'm going to do a comparison between distribution and transmission. And just from a basic foundation, distribution lines are those lines that are running through your neighborhood, through town, feeding residential customers, the small businesses, warehouses. Those are our distribution lines. Our transmission lines are going to be the larger lines on towers that kind of come from the plant and run cross country and make up the backbone of our grid. So on distribution, what I think we want to see remote sensing used for is to identify vegetation encroachments that are going to pose a threat to the system from a basic standpoint. And we can do that with people on the ground, but how can we take that to the next level and utilize technology to give us an idea of what's going on out there on a larger scale from a system-wide standpoint, and then use that information in the field? We want to see it help us prioritize the work. I mentioned earlier, a lot of times utilities are working from a cycle-based standpoint. How can we utilize this information to help us move more towards a condition-based maintenance, where we're actually doing maintenance based off of what we're seeing in the field rather than going, hey, we're going to look at this circuit every 3 years, and if something happens to pop up, we'll tackle that on a reactive basis if it pops up between those 3-year intervals. But we can use this data from a remote sensing standpoint to help us tackle work based off of what the actual condition is in the field at that moment. It can help us do specialized projects. So, what we may consider enhanced maintenance or in a customer sensitive area. You can use data to say, hey, I know that this circuit may not have been on our radar, but the data is supporting that the conditions are not great over here. And we've got some historical outages, and coupled with the vegetation encroachments that we're seeing from remote sensing can help us get funding for enhanced maintenance in that area. And then it does give the ability to see the field conditions while in the office. You can pull up the system and see what you're working with from a condition standpoint without having to rely on the time that it takes for a person or multiple people to give you a visual of the whole system in the field. It's all about combining that field presence. There's a lot of value in the human eye and having boots on the ground, but it's about combining that with the technology to really give you the best look at the system that you can get. And then from a transmission standpoint, again, same thing. You want to identify vegetation encroachments that pose a threat to your system. LiDAR specifically can use the line profile to calculate vegetation clearance during max sag and max sway. So from a transmission standpoint, when you've got heavy load of electrical current on a line, that line physically will sag down. And then same in windy situations, those lines have a sway to them where you're seeing physical movement, significant physical movement in the field. And remote sensing can actually predict that max sag and max sway, and utilizing what it sees in terms of the vegetation can tell us what the distance is going to be during those times, which is just not really something that we can do on a large scale with a person out there doing these inspections. You can perfect what we call blowout spans, where the current right-of-way conditions aren't suitable for your worst case scenario. We talked a little bit about that max sway. You've got spans where vegetation is going to be very close in your worst case scenario for that max sag and max sway, and we can utilize that data to go in there and perfect those spans on an individual basis. Again, this is a tool to help supplement the human eye. We want to try to help ourselves as much as we can to prevent issues and react to issues in cases where we're made aware of them. And then future state, maybe optimize pruning cycles on transmission and get to a point where the data is helping you see whether or not you do need to alter those cycles. So I want to talk first a little bit about LiDAR. LiDAR stands for light detection and ranging. So LiDAR measures the distance of an object by firing beams of light at the object and using the time and wavelength of that reflected beam of light to estimate the distance, and in some applications give you a 3D representation of the object. So I guess in layman's terms, you've got different ways of acquiring LiDAR data. So you can do it aerially by plane or helicopter or drone, or there's terrestrial, which is either setting up a device stagnant or attaching the device, the camera, to a vehicle and actually driving and capturing the data. But essentially, it's firing those beams of light from the camera, getting that reflected data from the light and creating 3D images of the object in question. So for us, that's a 3D representation of our facilities or the utilities facilities. So that's the actual poles and lines. And then also the vegetation and its proximity to those lines. So when it gives the 3D rendering, it can actually measure the distance from the tree that it's made the 3D model of and the power line, which is where we can use it to determine the conditions in the field. So, from a distribution standpoint, I've got a couple of examples just that we've used. And on the left is what I was describing earlier. It provides that 3D rendering. You can clearly see the pole and the attachments on the pole. So, that top line that you see, that's going to be the power line, and everything below it is going to be neutral and phone internet cables. So it produces this 3D rendering of the lines, and then you can see the trees with the point cloud graphics. It really does generate a good 3D image of what's in the field. And then again, like I was saying, it does determine distances from the vegetation to the line. And then on the right is a back office view of how we can digest that data. This was a particular project that we did where had some concerns in specific areas from reliability standpoint, and we were able to use that LiDAR data and determine for us what were the worst performing sections in this particular area. And then we wanted to get a view of the vegetation. What was the LiDAR data telling us about the vegetation in the area? You can see those circles on there, the red and orange and yellow. Those are trees, those are tree canopies, and the color denotes sort of their distance from the line. So obviously the red is going to be what's closest to the line and just gives you an idea of what the threat is out there, what the conditions are. And then from there, you can see okay, we'll send somebody out there to obviously validate the data and give us another look at what's in the field. And it just, it makes you a little bit more educated about what's out there and how you can prioritize. In this particular instance, you could look at the entire circuit and each section will be prioritized based off of the vegetation encroachments and the historical outage data. And that's how we utilized the LiDAR data to help us prioritize which sections to do in this particular project. And then this is an example of what we may see on transmission. So you've got a span here, and then you can see the yellow and blue polygons there right in the middle are showing us a cluster of trees that are on the right of way underneath the line. And the color, yeah, is going to denote the distance from the line and help us, number one, see, hey, LiDAR is identifying a threat here. This vegetation is either currently closer than we want it to be, or during those sag conditions, it'll tell us the distance that those trees would be from the line during those worst case scenarios. And again, just alerting us to that, you can send someone out there to validate the data and determine if that's something that you need to address. And if so, you may have prevented an issue there. Again, LiDAR is very precise. It provides that precise data for us in those locations. It provides an accurate look at where the facilities are and where the trees are in comparison. And it can really help determine the areas of need because of that. So, talking a little bit about the value, and I hit on this, several of these things already, is number one is the accuracy of that. You're going to get a really precise look because of the way the technology works of number one, where are your facilities? Where are those poles and lines? And then number two, where is that vegetation at? And then also being able to see the proximity of that vegetation to the power line. you've got the ability to help predict future issues and address them before they manifest. Just like in that picture I just showed of that transmission right of way, there's a chance that issue may not have been caught, let's just say for weeks or months before the next inspection. You've got this tool that is alerting you to this location that may not have otherwise been caught in time. And same on distribution. We're able to see data in these areas where we can address these potential outages or potential problem areas before they become a problem, or at least that's the hope. You could target areas that need prioritized maintenance. So I mentioned the project that we did on distribution for Georgia Power. A concern was raised on the reliability of an area, and we had the data to back up. Hey, yeah, the vegetation conditions in this area are telling us that it does need to be prioritized. And again, that goes back to the ability to move a little bit away from a scheduled cycle-based maintenance system over to a conditions-based maintenance system where you're able to prioritize and tackle areas that need the work based on the condition and not just because of the length of time it's been since they've been evaluated. And then another pro, obviously, is utilizing emerging technology to assist with utility vegetation maintenance. And I think that's important. As these tools become available, I think we've got to vet them and see how they can help us when it comes to creating our programs and managing them. A few of the cons, so obviously LiDAR data collection, it's very involved and it is expensive. So that's in a world where funding can be limited, that's definitely going to be one of the cons of LiDAR data. It's very expensive to get. Also, the data set is very complex. You're capturing this data via plane or vehicle or drone, and then that data's got to be processed and put into a way that can be digested by the utility. Lengthy turnaround time for receiving that data, I think, is pretty common. And then the data processing itself requires some skill to do. That data is turned around and put into a system, and then it's got to be provided to the utility. And then past that, the utility's got to have the way to create a priority system or a way for that data to be digested by its arborist or leadership in order to make an impact on the program. And then again, with LiDAR, you're seeing that data at a single point in time. So, that system's being, let's just say, flown, the LiDAR's being captured, and it's being captured at that point. So there's really no way to go back and see historical look at this location. What did this location look like 3 years ago? Over time, if you're able to capture LiDAR consistently, let's say money's no object and you can do LiDAR every year, yeah, you're going to build up that historical data set. But as I stated before, just very costly to do this type of evaluation. So now I want to talk a bit about satellite imagery. So satellite imagery, I think, is probably a little bit more, I guess, common, maybe more familiar to just the general public. Satellite imagery on your GPS systems. We've all dealt with Google Earth, I'm sure. So satellite imagery is something that we're familiar with, that we can play around with, and we've been there, done that to an extent. Technically, satellite imagery refers to the process of capturing visual data of the Earth's surface from satellites. So the satellites are equipped with specialized cameras and sensors that capture high-resolution images of the Earth's surface, which are then transmitted back to Earth for analysis. So essentially, after collecting the data, the satellite transmits that data back to Earth through radio waves to ground stations or antennas on the Earth's surface. And then you've got companies that gather that data and then provide it to companies for whatever their use may be, GPS, or in our case, utility companies, companies that work with utilities on helping them with their work management plans. Lots of different uses, but yeah, that information gets processed and then given to companies who have specialized interest in it. So how can it be used? very similar to LiDAR in how we want to see it help us. So from a transmission standpoint, you get that visual of clearance from the line. And that accuracy may be a little bit decreased. So you can think of it as, so LiDAR can measure basically in millimeters. Satellite imagery, the pixels would be more like the size of a sheet of paper. So that's the difference that you're seeing from a transmission standpoint. Your clearance should be enough where that's not going to make a difference, and you're still going to get that bang for your buck on getting the visual of the clearance of vegetation from the line. It can help with treatment recommendations. In years where you have limited funding, it can obviously help you prioritize work. Again, that's a main point that we want to see when we're using remote sensing on a utility vegetation management program development is how can this data help me prioritize my work? We want to get to what needs to be prioritized first, and we don't want to be guessing. We want to have that awareness. And then obviously it trues up field evaluation. An arborist could pull up satellite imagery of a line and have it right there at their fingertips to tell them, yeah, this line is due for maintenance and the satellite imagery reflects that, or the satellite imagery can alert them to an encroachment of vegetation on a transmission right of way and help them understand that, hey, I need to go address this now. And that's not just a transmission benefit, that's something the distribution also uses as well. From a distribution standpoint, satellite imagery can help provide an equipment use recommendation. So that's a little bit of satellite imagery plus AI, but it can utilize what it sees from satellite imagery coupled with topography to tell us, hey, in this area, you can utilize aerial trimming, or in this area, this is going to be climbing because it sees that the line goes behind houses. It can give you some of that smart information to help you plan out your work ahead of time. So let's say you're going to have funding for aerial trimming, but you want to have an idea ahead of time where you can put a helicopter because you can't just run a helicopter trimming through any area. So you can actually go in and get that data from a satellite imagery perspective, and it can help you understand, okay, we know this many miles of the system, we can potentially use the aerial saw. It at least gives you a starting point where you wouldn't have been able to get that information just from someone in the field, just from a time perspective. Again, prioritization of work areas. The satellite imagery tells us where the vegetation encroachments, and using that coupled with our data of past outages and customer types, we can use that to prioritize power line circuits and be smarter about which lines that we're working and prioritizing. Another thing that's pretty unique to satellite imagery is it can identify declining or hazardous trees. Because it is imagery, it can tell us areas where trees are starting to die out or decline, which may clue you into, hey, I need to go here and see if we've got trees that are going to pose a hazard to the line. And that's also something that's used on transmission as well. And it gives a great visual of the entire system. We can see in 1 year the entire system from a satellite imagery perspective and really help us with that prioritization. So what's the value of satellite imagery, or the potential value? So the pros are it's cost effective, fraction of the cost of what you're going to see from a LiDAR perspective, because number one, the satellites are already there. That data is already available, and it's earth-wide. You've got those images available for the entire Earth in just one stop. So much more cost effective, quicker data collection and processing because of this, and it's just less complex data. Consistent data collection, which means that you can monitor changes over time. Excuse me. So you've got that historical data. It's if you've ever pulled up Google Earth to look at a property that had trees on it and then got clear cut. You can go back and see what that property looked like before, and then now you can get a snapshot of, okay, that all the trees are gone. You can visually see that and monitor those changes over time. And we can do the same thing from a utility standpoint. You get that data and you've got the ability to monitor those changes over time because you can get that historical look. The con is less precise data than LiDAR, which could lead to decreased accuracy in some cases. So I mentioned earlier, from a transmission standpoint, LiDAR data can give you within millimeters, but the satellite imagery may be more like a sheet of paper. So that's kind of what you're looking at in terms of the difference. One difference that we've seen in our experience is LiDAR can penetrate, but satellite imagery cannot. So an example would be if you've got a tree that has overhang over the line. LiDAR can penetrate that overhang and actually go through it and then tell you how far that overhang is from the line because it has that look at where are the facilities and exactly mapping those out. Where is that vegetation at? And I can tell you how far away it is, even above the line and to the side of it. Whereas satellite imagery does have a limitation there. So it can't penetrate through the overhang of the tree. So it has to do a little bit of estimating in order to tell us what kind of encroachment that is. Your main value, though, if possible, is if you can have LiDAR and satellite work with each other, because as it turns out, they really do complement each other in terms of strengths and weaknesses. So, in a perfect world, yeah, you'd love to see where you can utilize your LiDAR data and your satellite imagery together. How does that look? From an accuracy times efficiency standpoint, LiDAR produces that precise data in identifying your vegetation encroachments. That tells you, number one, it's identified where your facilities are, and that gives you that precise, yeah, this pole is right here, and I know it is with 95% accuracy. I know that this data right here is in the right location. And it also is very accurate in identifying the vegetation, but it's not very efficient in data collection. So that satellite imagery provides the efficiency in the data collection and processing. So maybe you can use the LiDAR data telling you where your facilities are, but then you can use the satellite imagery to get an accurate picture of the vegetation condition every single year. Whereas you may not be able to financially support flying LiDAR on your system every year. It would be much more attainable to get that satellite imagery data year after year so that you can really get a good idea of maintaining your entire system. And I talked about the cost comparison. I mentioned that a little bit just now, but LiDAR is very expensive to do. If you're flying the data, you may be able to only do your system in pieces. And so you may not get that overall snapshot of what your system looks like because you just can't support it from a funding standpoint. Satellite is much more cost effective, so that may be what works best for your utility. Health assessments. So LiDAR provides a great structural analysis. So it has the ability to tell us what is there and give us a precise location. And satellite imagery can then assess that vegetation health over time in areas that we may be concerned with. And then finally, wildfire mitigation. We don't deal a lot with that here in Georgia, thankfully, but we do know our counterparts out west definitely deal with the risk of wildfire. And so what LiDAR can do is provide that precise proximity of vegetation to the power line to help determine if you've got a fire threat there, if you've got something that could potentially cause a fire. And then that satellite's going to detect any vegetation stress that you may have out there, which may also set you up for potential wildfire. If you've got an area with a lot of dead vegetation, that's going to definitely pose a greater wildfire risk, and it may be something that you can get out there and help to mitigate. Circling back, giving an overview and talking about what are the goals that you want to achieve as the utility when implementing remote sensing. From a bottom line, we want to enhance the accuracy of our vegetation assessments. Again, we want to always be keeping at the forefront, providing the best service that we can for our customers, and also making sure that we are preventing unsafe conditions. And that's going to be your ultimate goal every time. And remote sensing can help us do that in so many ways. Like I said, enhancing the accuracy of your vegetation assessments. Like I said, it's great to have people in the field, arborists, that are doing those day-to-day check-ins in person, responding to tickets, helping the crews overseeing their work. But on the front end, let's see how accurate we can get in knowing where we need to be. And people out in the field just can't cover the amount of ground that we can with this remote sensing and giving us a great foundation to start. Providing the utility with better awareness of system conditions. Like I said, when you get stuck on a cycle-based schedule, not that it doesn't work to an extent, but you really lose that awareness between cycle intervals. And being able to have remote sensing that tells us, hey, here's where the encroachments are, whether you're using LiDAR or satellite imagery, telling us, hey, here's where the vegetation encroachments are on the system, and here's how you need to prioritize your work, or here's how you need to react to go address a problem that's going to cause an issue immediately. Comprehensive data on tree health tells the arborist where to look. So it helps that arborist manage the area that they're working in. And lastly, like we talked about, wildfire prevention. Giving the utility a better awareness of that system condition can really help you in terms of knowing where are some problem areas where I know I can make a difference and potentially prevent a catastrophic issue. So wanted to make sure I gave us time to address questions that you might have. Like I said, I'm not a data analyst. I'm by no means an expert in the area, but I do think it's important to shed light of what can be utilized and what some utilities are utilizing in terms of making a difference in the way that we are managing work. Definitely a high level overview of those two remote sensing options. I also do want to add the use of drones. We talked about drones are obviously a way to capture LiDAR, but we have also utilized drones to access parts of the right of way that are inaccessible. So let's just say a swamp or just not able to be traversed for whatever reason. We have used drones to capture hazards and give us a look at the right of way in those areas as well. With that tidbit, I'm going to end. I've got my contact info here on the screen. If anybody has any questions afterwards that they didn't think of or anything they want to pick my brain on, I got my email here, so please feel free to reach out and I'll do my best.
Thanks, Jesse. That was very informative. We did have a couple of questions, and please feel
Okay.
free to drop your questions in the Q&A, and we do have a little bit of time to answer questions, so don't hesitate to ask. The first question is, does LiDAR data go into public domain at any point, or is it entirely and permanently proprietary to who paid to have it done?
That's a great question. With my limited knowledge, I'm going to say that that's going to be proprietary to who paid to get the data. Because I guess in my experience, the data is so specific to the utility that I guess acquired it that I think that it would probably just be private information. I guess I can't speak to maybe government agencies that utilize it in natural resources or just other natural resource use of LiDAR data. Maybe that would be something that is available, but I would say that definitely in our experience, that's going to be sort of private data.
Seems every business and every technology is talking about AI. What might be the application of this?
So I will say when you're looking at this data, a lot of times it is best coupled with AI. And how that would potentially work is, and I talked a little bit about it too, but using the data to tell you where to work, it does require a little bit of AI in order to do that. So I hit on this a little bit when I talked about like equipment recommendations in an area. So What that's doing is it's using kind of artificial intelligence of the area that the satellite imagery is captured, using the satellite imagery and the topography of the area, as well as looking to see, is there a house here? In proximity of the house, where is the power line? Where is the vegetation? That's where it generates, hey, here's our recommendation of what equipment to use in that area. So that would be an application of AI in terms of processing the data.
Any other questions from the audience? Oh, one just came in. Are there any considerations of using LiDAR crop analysis, such as soil moisture content, to track growth of various tree species in the utility right-of-way to help assess priority of species in specific right-of-way? That's a complicated question. You can see it in the Q&A if you want to read it over.
Let me look at that one. This is maybe one I want to think on and answer later, maybe do a little research on. I know that one application of using remote sensing specifically on our transmission rights of way, we are always trying to convert the floor, what we call the floor, which is kind of everything under the power lines. Our goal is to reduce the maintenance that we have to do in terms of controlling what's on the floor of our rights of way. So I know using LiDAR to help us get a better idea of what, and satellite imagery to help us get a better idea of what's out there on the right of way can help us determine where we can enhance or convert those places to pollinator habitat, native grasses. We have done some research on that. So I know that's not exactly answering your question, and I'd love to do more research on it because I do think that's something important. Because, like I said, we're always looking at ways where we can decrease our management of particularly the floor of the right of way, which is where we do see pollinator habitat, where we're trying to promote that. So great question. Just off the top of my head, probably don't have a super detailed answer on that one.
Sounds like a great research project if it hasn't already been done. Can LiDAR assess tree risk currently, level 1 or level 2, if yes?
Yes, I do think LiDAR can give us an idea of tree risk in terms of, and the way that we've used it is in terms of just distance from the line. That's where I'm speaking from is we can utilize the LiDAR data to see, hey, how close is this vegetation to the line? And from there, we can go out and determine what that tree's risk is to the line using boots on the ground. I do think that the capability is there. I don't have any firsthand experience with it, but I do think there is some capability with doing tree risk using that LiDAR data. I would say probably going to be level 1. Yeah.
Okay, any other questions? Okay, while you're thinking of your questions, I'm going to go ahead and share the link for the CEU credit. So I'm going to go ahead and drop that in the chat. It looks like we do have one other question. With canopy density being a potential disadvantage of LiDAR system, I know you mentioned the use of drones. Are the use of handheld LiDAR SLAM being utilized? Or I don't know if that's SLAM or SLAM.
I'd have to look into that too. That I'm unfamiliar with that.
All right, I will put the two of you in touch so that you can discuss.
Yeah. Absolutely, yeah. And like I said, I admittedly am not the expert on this, but just wanted to get the conversation started. And these are great questions for me to continue learning as well. So, yeah, definitely put us in touch, Jesse, if you can. I'd love to research that more.
Okay, if you're looking for CEU credit, there is the link in the chat, and I hope that you'll join us. Again, next week we have another presentation, the final presentation in our trees and our business of arboriculture class. It's going to be on this building a safety system. And then next month is going to be trees and stormwater runoff. So please join us for those. You can find all the event information on our website, as well as our summer workshop, our WRQ, and all kinds of upcoming programs. So please pay attention to that. We are also planning a Trees and Technology Day in the fall, which is going to be free for attendees to learn about some emerging technologies. So if you're interested in LiDAR and drones and seeing demonstrations in person, that is going to be most likely in September. Still working out the details, but stay tuned for more information about that. Again, thank you, Jesse, so much for your presentation. It's always a pleasure having you speak for us and on utility topics, which we can always learn more about. So thank you again. We really appreciate your time. And I will also send out a recording of this presentation to everyone who signed up. So if you wanted to review some stuff that you learned, you could always go back and review it. So thank you, everyone. For the trees and technology, we had a question in the chat. That is going to be an in-person presentation. I don't know that I'll be able to do a Zoom or record it because it's going to be both indoor and outdoor. Hopefully you can travel to the Atlanta area and join us for that. All right. Thank you, everyone, so much for joining us. It is going to be during the week. Again, stay tuned for our website. There will be an announcement soon for that. Thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful afternoon.
Thanks, Jesse. Thanks, guys.
Bye.